Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Elm City Lit Fest podcast. I'm Ife Michelle Gardine, founder.
I'm Sean McAllister.
Ja's a co-coordinator. Elm City Lit Fest is a celebration of literature, literary arts, and literary artists of the African diaspora. And tonight we're going to talk about the lit part, the literacy part of lit, because we also promote literacy. And I am happy to say, and I haven't said it enough, that I am a proud board member of Literacy Volunteers of Greater New Haven. Our guest this evening is Ms. Valerie Sanchez, Williams Sanchez. Oops. Welcome, Valerie.
Hello. How are you?
And Valerie's going to talk about her multi-projects. Valerie and I met we were both working at Columbia University years ago, and also at Good Wine in Brooklyn through good friends out there.
Yes.
I got a picture of us with Jacqueline Woodson that night.
And Jason Reynolds. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Very important evening. Yeah.
It was. So Valerie, just give us a little brief history about yourself, and then we get to talking.
Sure. I'll keep it as brief as possible, but all anchored in my literacy work. So right now I am a student doing a doctoral thesis, doing doctoral work in literacy at St. John's University in New York, in Queens, New York. And I come to this program kind of through a bunch of different activities that I came to organically over the course of my career. I started off as a journalist, working journalist, a daily reporter, and moved into marketing communications in a corporate setting. But as time wore on and I grew older, I had my one and only daughter and then my one and only nephew. I started writing children's books, and that ignited a passion in me that I am still enjoying and kind of exploring. Went back to school for it, and am now not only a children's author, but also a reading researcher, something I'm really enjoying and happy to share and talk about tonight.
Oh, we're so glad to have you with us.
We are. Thank you for coming out, Ms. Valerie, and spending time with us this evening and fellowshipping now. I wanted to ask you about you being a principal investigator, but a reading researcher is just as exciting. So can you tell me a little bit about both and give us some context to what that means?
Sure. So as a reading researcher, I am someone who investigates trends, phenomenon, issues, new and kind of emergent in the world of literacy. And my particular area of specialization, the philosophical kind of framework from which I look at my work, is largely related to culturally relevant pedagogy. So that means I'm looking at story, how it relates to the emergence of self, how we learn and define ourselves through information we gain from what we read, and how we see ourselves reflected in the works that we read and choose to read and are exposed to through education. Now, as a principal investigator, I am now currently involved in a project that's looking at reading and how reading builds empathy. So my research and investigation is looking at trends that are emerging with kids and talking with kids about what they're coming away with from their readings and what they're learning. And the fun part about my work is I get to talk to kids. I get to talk to kids about what they learn, what they understand, and what resonates with them in their reading. And it's been, I can tell you, it's quite a remarkable journey I'm on right now. Hearing what kids say versus what parents say, it's really eye-opening, particularly now.
Now that we're in COVID, how has that worked for you? Like how have you been able to do your study?
Right. So the study that I've developed, actually the methodology was meant to be in a one-on-one kind of investigation and interaction. But because of COVID, the guidelines have changed, and I've had to use and migrate into a digital space, just like everybody else who's reading and learning and pretty much doing anything else these days. And as a result, it's a different experience. I am finding, though, that I'm getting the same type of candid responses that I would get otherwise. And that's I'm very thankful of that, because that's really what my study is about, is getting, firsthand feedback from the folks with whom I'm in conversation.
What are the children saying? What are they saying that they're walking away with? What's sticking to them?
Well, it varies, and I don't really want to draw any conclusions just yet, because I'm still in the process of data collection. But it is interesting. It is interesting to hear, and without giving away too many of the questions, because I don't, like I said, I am still in the process of data collection. But the goal really is to get kids unfiltered response to what they've read, and to find out if they feel through the reading that they've done, if it's helping them to be able to see different perspectives. And that's really the notion of empathy, or the idea of empathy that I'm exploring. In academia, we call it the construct. The construct of empathy that I'm looking at has really three different angles, and it's the emotional, it's the cognitive, and it's the ethnocultural dimensions of empathy with which I am most concerned.
Is your study just based in New York, since you're at St. John's, or is it global?
No, and it ties to the question that Shay asked me. Because I'm in a digital space, I really don't have boundaries, right? Anyone who's interested is more than welcome. If you're a reader, or if you're a parent of a child age 6 to 8, and you're interested, you can join in. And because the work is largely anonymous, and I say that because, of course I need to be able to contact people and get information to them, but the data collection and the aggregation of data and the statistical analysis, it's all done, based on the aggregate of data, the anonymous data. So, it's really about who's interested, who wants to volunteer to be part of the effort.
How does empathy connect with reading and literacy? Why is it important that our youth and young people?
I'm so glad you asked that.
Gain these skills.
Yeah, empathy. It's strange because these days we're hearing people are talking about empathy in so many different environments, right? In the political debates, you're hearing people talk about empathy. I think about a month ago, there was a big spread on empathy in the New York Times, and how can we learn it? You're hearing about empathy just in terms of civil discourse and our ability to have intelligent and insightful and respectful conversation and dialogue with our other citizens. And empathy is all part of that. Empathy is really our ability to take the perspective of someone else, right? Be it to understand that their perspective is different, but to be respectful of it. Or if it's just having the capacity to understand that someone might actually see something differently than you do. Empathy is what enables us to do a lot of that.
It kind of gives you that platform to step outside yourself.
Exactly. And that's how it plays out in education. Think about the books that you've read as a kid and all that you've learned, the places you've gone, the places you've explored, the people you've met through the pages of a book. empathy is part of what enables us to gain those insights, to be able to take the perspective of someone else, to step outside ourselves, and to learn from those experiences.
And once a student has grasped empathy, what next door does that open for them?
So it plays out actually in our schooling, right? In Common Core here in the state of New York, the standards include being able to read a passage and write some type of text, right? And those two processes are core and central to literacy, being able to read and write. So the ability to read about something, the ability to take the perspective and learning from what you've read, and then to see it through another's eyes and then translate it into something you can speak about, that's the whole process. That's all that we're looking for. And so it's critical to our learning. It's critical to the pedagogy of learning through reading text and then being able to express ourselves, our thoughts as relates to what we've learned.
No.
I keep muting myself because I got emotions. I be like, So have you been able to work with like educational programs, like teacher training programs or education systems with this study or with the learning?
That's ultimately that's the goal. Right now, I'm piloting this study. I'm piloting this instrument, as we say in academia. It's a quantitative research design. And so once I come away with my findings, hopefully I'll be able to take it to the next level, take it to the next step, and prove that it's an effective and efficacious, as they say, instrument that can then be used by different educators, different entities and organizations that have an interest in this area of learning.
Now, Ms. Valerie, your research encompasses multimodal learning, access, equity, inclusion for emergent readers of color, and culturally relevant content. I want to get into separately. Right. I want to get into separately the importance of culturally relevant context.
Okay.
And how that.
Okay, wait. Did I go mute or did you?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I can't hear Shay.
Uh-oh. No, we can't hear you, Sha.
Oh, and it was such a good question.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you are.
It's Five Below headphones.
Product placement. Uh-oh, watch out.
So I'll restate the question. So okay. Your PhD research currently encompasses multimodal learning, access, equity, inclusion for emergent leaders, and culturally relevant content. I want to get into the culturally relevant content kind of separately because I feel like people don't speak about relevant content and culturally content.
Okay.
But how do these factors tie into literacy? Where does the interconnectedness happen?
Okay, and let's break this down. Let's chunk this out, as they say. The first concept you mentioned was which?
Multimodal learning.
Okay, so multimodal learning relates to text that is multimodal. So that would be text that has both pictures and words, right? So for kids in the age group I'm looking at, typically books include pictures. There might be picture books or they might be graphic books, but they have an interplay of messaging that is gleaned or that is gained from not just the text, but also the image. So I look specifically, because I'm looking at this age group, at books that typically are multimodal. Typically, they're picture books or typically books that have that interplay. In terms of access, equity, and inclusion, I'm really concerned with how kids see themselves in the pages of the books that they're reading, right? Not only how they get them, but how they have access to the stories, the narratives, and the textual messaging that's included in books. So that's the access. The equity is that I feel that people of color really need to be both equally represented, but also have an equitable experience in the pages of books, right? So that means that the full breadth of the African diaspora should be represented in the pages of books, and all kids from all walks of the African diaspora should be able to find a book that speaks to their lived experience. And that's also about inclusion, right? And the importance of all of those things, and I think that might have been the last one, culturally relevant pedagogy, was that the last point that you cited? Is that when kids see themselves in the pages of books, they become part of the learning experience and part of the learning process, right? When you see yourself or you hear a story that resonates, or it's about someone who looks like you or thinks like you or lives somewhere like you, all of a sudden, whatever's being discussed, it has relevance. In my teaching experience, I can't tell you how many times I've had my students, raise their hand and say, Ms. Williams Sanchez, why do we have to learn this? This has nothing to do with my life. I don't know these people. This means nothing. And why do I have to waste my time learning this stuff? Right? So when you bring this notion of access, equity, and inclusion into education, all of a sudden you have an easier time engaging students, and their motivation is oftentimes much higher. Not to mention it helps them feel seen. And one of the real core kind of pedagogical points of my research and my look at literature and literacy is the point that in a lot of ways, when you have an inclusive text or you have an inclusive pedagogy, it becomes almost a therapeutic experience. When you see yourself in the pages of a book, all of a sudden you matter. And in an era right now when Black Lives Matter is it's such a polarizing issue to me, that is such it's not even up for debate. It's really important to know that you matter, to see yourself, to be justified in your experience, to be justified in your thoughts, your feelings, and your worldview and your beliefs. And that's really kind of, in a nutshell, what a lot of my research looks at, seeks to find grounding, and really seeks to explore in ways to make that a reality for more students.
That's a good mute, but
Okay.
that's okay. You bring up a really valid point that I think kind of gets overlooked in school. Kids who would be like, "Why is this relevant to me?" They would get the answer, "Well, it's going to help you later in life. It's going to make sense later on." But that's not helpful if you continuously go through schooling and none of this has anything to do with you. Anybody that looks like you isn't relevant to your situation, anyone's situation that you know around you. And I would see motivation just diminish. Folks would be like, "This has nothing to do with me. I'm not checked." They check out instantly.
Right.
But I feel like we are always called to check in to someone else's culture when no one has to check into ours. That we have to now push and put our works and our lives and ourselves into literature and have it be, spread abundantly so that we ourselves as Black people can feel a part of it and feel seen. But I think it's also important for those who aren't Black to get these experiences, to have some sort of context of our lives. Like, I'm learning through my friends that they have no idea what's going on in our lives. And I have no idea what's going on in their lives. And we've kind of reduced it to an algorithm, that our algorithms on the internet are different. But I don't think that takes away from, maybe we could have been more empathetic to each other very much more early on if we would have been exposed to each other.
Yeah. You've touched on so many really important points. The first thing two things that come to mind, but in my own personal history and kind of experience, what you brought to mind was the experience I had when I was in high school, and I brought an Essence magazine to my high school class. Now, mind you, I'm from Southern California, and back when I was in middle school, I think I was the only Black kid in my English lit classes, right? Because I'm from Orange County, California, where Trump is tonight. He touched down at John Wayne Airport. I saw that. I was like, oh, okay. And that kind of tells you the environment in which I grew up. And I remember the day that I brought that Essence magazine in, and my classmates were like, wait, what's that? What are you looking at? What kind of weird magazine is that? Where are the white people? How come it's all black people in that magazine? And to them, it was the strangest things they ever seen. They had never seen anything like that. Now, mind you, like so many other, African-American households, Essence, Ebony, Jet, those were like, the holy trio that were always, I, as a little kid, would go running to the mailbox, the beginning of the month looking for the Essence, that, which was my favorite because I was like fashion and beauty, whatever. So, you raise a good point that the exposures need to be in both directions. And, as someone who is who's a budding scholar or emergent scholar in literacy, I do believe in wide reading. I do believe there's really value in not most everything, but much of what people read, and it doesn't need to be only one type of reading. But I think the exposures and the access and equity of representation are so skewed, and this bears out in, in data. I think We Need Diverse Books, big shout out. They published the graphic that shows I think it's the Madison, Wisconsin Cooperative of Children's Lit. And they do a breakout each year of how many of the new commercial titles, what the content is. So there's percentage breakouts in terms of what they call general market content, or characters that are, white. Then they have a breakout for characters that are animal or fantasy. And then they have a chunk that's broken out for, Black and people of color. Now, altogether, that's your 100%, but siloed out. And when you look at each of the Black and people of color category, the breakouts by culture are very minimal and don't begin to compare it to the big general market chunk. And often, and I think this year, the Black and people of color chunk, as it has been in years past, is less than the chunk for animal and fantasy characters. So, that speaks to the notion and the need for greater representation for Black and people of color in content overall. To me, I think, especially for kids at this age group, which increasingly data is showing that, kids are seeing difference. They're identifying difference at earlier ages than earlier understood. I think 5 is now the age. So it means that there's an opportunity now to start teaching kids about equity, teaching kids and exposing them to other cultures so they have an appreciation and can begin to develop the tools and the capacity for being empathetic individuals, not only readers, earlier on in their lives.
Now, do you feel like, I feel like sometimes it's written off that kids can't handle this. Now, can you make it clear for us and those watching, what are children ready for this? Can they handle it?
What do you mean by this? Do you mean are kids ready to handle seeing the people that they might run into in the supermarket on the pages of their book?
I do, because I feel like for adults or those in the industry, they make it seem like it's this far-fetched idea that it's going to take years to change into this, that, this may be too abrupt, or that even speaking about teaching them about empathy.
Well, here's what I think about that point. I don't think it's too early. As I mentioned, I think increasingly cognitive development and data around child development are suggesting that kids are noticing difference at earlier ages than before believed to be. And again, I mentioned the 5-year-old seems to be the age at this point where that seems to be really true. And this is a different issue than changing the publishing system, right? So the publishing industry is its own entity. It's its own industrial complex. And the decisions that are made in that space aren't necessarily tied to what is best practices in child development, right? Typically, it's a business and it's a business model. So it follows a whole different logic. In as much as how we can get to diversifying what people are reading just in general, I think technology has really been the key to that, in as much as it's allowed self-publishing, surprisingly, to start to take on greater responsibility, greater really market share, even in terms of what types of stories, what narratives are being dispersed, distributed, and what's available for people to read. So a lot of the stories and narratives that wouldn't necessarily be picked up in a traditional publishing environment now have found a place in the sun and on the shelves through self-publishing. And I think that's a really important thing because, cultures that have been largely marginalized now have access to their own means of publishing, and they can produce and create content on their own terms.
The technology has cut out the middleman.
In some degrees, yes. Of course, the self-publishing, author doesn't necessarily have the same scope or span of distribution as a publisher, a mainstream publisher, but they can, as an emergent writer, they can start maybe working their own titles and hopefully get some exposure that might ultimately be picked up. So that's not the typical kind of trajectory for a self-publisher. And typically self-publishers just want to get their story out. They're not looking necessarily for that big deal. If you're looking for that big deal, then you got to get an agent and you have to kind of work in that publishing space. But for those who are just interested in committing a particular story to paper and maybe having an impact on their immediate community, I think self-publishing is a really viable and important and really important new option for us, as in all the different cultures, subcultures, and broader culture here in the United States. And interestingly, there is a history of this. I did some research on W.E.B. Du Bois, the Brownies books, which was the first periodical for and by children of color, right? Or it largely recognized as the first. There are other smaller publications, but because of his renown as one of the first PhDs in education and his work with Alan Locke, he gets that top billing. And that work, which just celebrated its 100-year anniversary this year, was a wonderful model that showed people of color, taking the reins of publishing into their own hands, creating their own stories, and giving children of color their first public space to start talking about their experiences and seeing themselves in real ways that they controlled. And that's huge. That's a model we still need. And I think there's a new magazine in the UK that's really trying to do that, and others, including some projects I'm working on that are looking to do that here in the US.
Now, Ms. Valerie, you are a self-published author and illustrator. Can you give us a little insight on that process for those who may be thinking about starting that journey or contemplating it from the illustrator side and the author side?
Yeah, sure. So, and I'm going to do a little product shot real quick here. Here's my book, Lorena and the Magic Mocha Mirror. This is one of three, and this is the one I illustrated, right? And that was really kind of a big leap of faith on my part to try and take on the illustration of the book. But I think anyone who has a story to tell should feel empowered to endeavor to create their own books. I think it's a wonderful experience. I think the culture in general is better off by taking ownership of its literacy, right? You're able to tell your story in your terms. You're able to shade it, develop it as you see fit. And there's so many resources out there now that make it easy, that it's the learnings that you have that you can share with the community, and those who ultimately will become your readers, just impact and empower the community at large. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity and avenue. Again, I think it's for folks who are really clear about what they want to achieve in self-publishing or in publishing. If you're looking to become the next, author of the next blockbuster, and you want an agent, and you want to, be the next, we were talking about Jason Reynolds earlier and Jacqueline Woodson, those folks, the thing about writing is you just got to write, you just got to do it. And I think if you're looking to get your story out, self-publishing is a great way to do it. But if you're looking again to be, a broadly distributed author, you probably want to find an agent. But all of it requires just write the story, just start somewhere and, enjoy the ride, enjoy the journey.
Okay, with that said, because you had a little intro with your book.
Yeah.
Your Coco Kids collection. We're gonna talk about the Coco Kids now.
Okay.
Because I really love the themes in this in your books, the motivation on top of young people seeing themselves, kids seeing themselves. There's a theme. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about the theme of each book and a little bit about the stories.
Okay, sure. So yeah, the Coco Kids collection is a 3-book series of children's books that include a narrative piece and then an expository piece, or usually it's an activities or some piece that includes some sort of expository learning. So the first part is a narrative, it's a fictitious narrative, and then the next part is something to kind of explore in a different way. Each of the stories is based on somebody in my life, right? So my first story was Isaiah and the Chocolate Mountain, and that story was based on my nephew Isaiah. The second book is Eddie and the Hot Cocoa Hot Rod, and that was loosely based on a dear friend of mine, and kind of a story I created based on knowing what his childhood passions were. He's grown up, but it's based on an imagined version of himself as a child. And then the third that I showed, Lorena and the Magic Mocha Mirror, that's based on my daughter, my 25-year-old daughter, Lorena, who lives in Southern California. Now, each of the stories, let me start with the first. The first, which started it all, was a story that I told my nephew one day when I was babysitting him. And without giving away too much of it, it's loosely about a little boy who doesn't like chocolate, believe it or not. And that's what he gets for his birthday. So he kind of, reacts to that. And that kind of sets off a sequence of events that he has to kind of find his way through. And it explores his emotions through that journey of, the excitement, the anticipation of the gift, the excitement of getting the gift, and then the disappointment of getting something he didn't want. And so that book is really an exploration of emotional intelligence. And it's the first step for kids to learn about their emotions and to start identifying their emotions. It's got pictures. Again, as I mentioned, it's got an expository piece that helps kids to start to think about their own emotions and also to kind of identify what those emotions feel like for them. So it's really meant to give kids that first step. And all of my books are meant to be platforms for parents to start the conversations with their kids. So the parent's supposed to read it with the child. The child then, by working the activities in each of the books, takes that learning from that fun, kind of lighthearted narrative and gets really into the nitty gritty of some of the stories. Now, the second and third books, again, briefly, Eddie and the Hot Cocoa Hot Rod, that's got kind of a STEM message. It's about a little boy who struggles with his math. And it's not until one of his teachers, a math teacher who he has a shared passion for cars, that's the Hot Cocoa Hot Rod, that he's able to kind of make the grade, if you will. And ultimately he is successful in turning things around and getting onto the what did I call it? The racer roundup. So he gets to get into a race car club that the kids are doing, the radio controlled cars. Now this character's idol is Lewis Hamilton. So if you're an F1 racing fan, Lewis Hamilton is multiracial, and he's also the reigning F1 champion, who I think is, if not one win shy of the all-time record of being the winningest F1, Formula One racer, if not being tied for it today. So he's a tremendous role model, if you will, and someone that the kids can read about and learn about in the expository sections of the book. Now, I also included a little nod to Bubba Wallace, who is the NASCAR, racing guy. Yeah, that's made headlines recently. And I did this. I mean, this book was written at this point, 5 years ago. So I just was researching, history about auto sports and Black people, not just Black men, because Tia Norfleet, who is an African-American young woman, we also give a nod to Tia because, she's doing her thing as well. And that's something not everyone knows. So there's a lot of different people. There's actually I think it's called the Winner's Circle in the back of that book that has little excerpts about some of the better known Black auto sports people in recent history. And so that also gives kids an opportunity to explore if they have an interest in sports or in auto sport, to find out kind of, if they have that passion, to see themselves again, as mentioned, to see that they are represented in that part of the world as well. And then finally, my book, Lorena and the Magic Mocha Mirror, that's a book about body image. And that story is really about a little girl who's teased because she basically has a larger frame than the kids she's hanging out with at the beach. And as an African-American woman, that's a common, yeah, exactly. That's a very common theme. That's a common trope. I myself experienced that. And I think so many Black women have had to have they talk about those talks. That's one of those talks, honey, you are beautiful and you're not going to be a size 2 necessarily. And you're not fat when they tell you you're fat. You're just bigger than that. You just got a bigger build. So Lorena and the Magic Mocha Mirror tells the story of a little girl who's teased and body shamed by beach bullies. But she ultimately, she has a fantastic and a fantasy experience with 3 mermaids of different body shapes. And they share that they too have those same, body insecurities. And in their telling of their stories, she's informed and she learns to love herself and that everybody is beautiful. So that expository part is a paper doll section that has the shapes of the 3 body types, the ectomorph, mesomorph, and which one did I leave out? Endomorph. So it has the 3 body shapes and different outfits. So the girls can kind of get a sense of what that body shape means and how to start thinking about how you dress for your body shape, right? And the other piece that's expository in that piece that I really had fun with was looking at celebrities and identifying who had what type of body, right? So from your Misty Copelands to your Beyoncés to your Serena Williams, you're seeing all these beautiful, powerful Black women who are doing amazing things with their bodies and their minds, right? But that look different across the board.
Yes. And I mean, the images, there's so many young women, so many grown women that needed to have that as a young person growing up, because like Black women still to this day are tripping about their curves or whatever. And we do have like Lizzo, I love her.
Yeah.
Like she's like, this is me, this is all I am, how I am. And like you said, we have Misty, Beyonce, and Serena, and everybody's body type is different. And it's like, here I am as a smart woman. And I love the illustrations. Were you always an artist? How did you get into the inspiration for the illustrations? And did you just illustrate one book or all 3?
Yeah. And I'll tell you the story. that was a funny thing. So I found when I started this, I as I shared, I have a undergraduate degree, if I didn't mention this, in English literature, and then I have a journalism degree, a master's level journalism degree. So I was really comfortable with the writing, right? That wasn't the part that intimidated me. But illustrating was something I never even imagined. I mean, I have a deep passion for fine arts, painting and drawing, but I've never really had any exposure in that way. And so I've sought out an illustrator, and I found a great one who was able to really kind of take the sketches that I had I'd hand drawn, and really apply her style to kind of bring this vision to life. But by the 3rd book, I started, and this was interestingly because it was the body image book, right? And I sent over sketches, and I think she was kind of like, what is this? What are you trying to send me? And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I need to draw, and we ultimately parted ways because I decided, to heck with it. Let me try and do this myself. So I enrolled in my local art school, Rockland Center for the Arts. And with the help of an amazing art instructor, I basically redid all the sketches in my own, my own quirky style to do the illustrations on the third book. And I was really pleased with the result. Let me see if I can't show you this one image that I speak of in particular, because I think, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but I think it's this one. It's called The Boardwalk. And if you can see this, this is the picture that I really enjoyed. And this is the one that made the difference, because you see how I was able to kind of show the wide hips of the woman, and the mom who's got a little bit more, she's cuddly, she's got a little bit more meat on her bones. But, this was I was really happy to take that on, because I was able to really execute my vision of, the people in my life, the people around me and what they look like in beautiful ways. So, it was something that I just on a lark decided, out of necessity, as they say, the mother of invention. And thus I've, headed down this road of illustration. And I've continued to draw, and I enjoy it. And I seek to, continue taking classes, as I mentioned, or if I don't know if I mentioned it on air, but I look to do a second edition of the books on the completion of my doctoral journey that will incorporate some of the learnings that I've had and made, the insights that I've had through my educational process to make this a more insightful and a more kind of a stronger tool to empower kids to take ownership of their literacy and to really to enjoy the stories, to be honest, because that's really what matters. You want to read something you like. So I want it to be a great experience for kids, and look to improve it as much as possible.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite pictures in that book also is it Grandma Mimi's kitchen?
Oh yeah.
And so what was your inspiration behind Grandma Mimi's kitchen? Is it you really got a Grandma Mimi?
Yeah, I do. My mom, we call me, my daughter calls my mom Mimi. Here it is. So this is the other picture you're talking about. Whoops.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So my mom lives in Laguna. And like I said, my family's from Southern California. So this Grandma Mimi's kitchen it's this empty room. And what was really interesting was that it was empty. It's empty because the family was never at home. And that was my memory of my mom and my grandmother, actually. My grandmother, Mary Evelyn, she and I would always go, whenever I went to my grandmother's house, we would pack up on the bus, mind you, in Southern California, and go whisking off into adventure. And oftentimes we'd end up at the museums, right? The Los Angeles County Museum, the La Brea Tar Pits. We were always out, exploring. And so what was so memorable about that space and my mom's space is that these kitchens are empty. They're full of love. They're full of pictures. They're well lived in, but there's nobody in it because we're out living our lives and having these wonderful adventures that you ultimately get to read about in the pages of the books.
Wow. So, in one of your other many hats,
oh yes,
you are a project manager and do professional project management on diversity projects. Can you tell us a little bit about that and your experience in that?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm a project management institute, or a PMI certified project manager. As I mentioned earlier, that after I was a daily reporter, I got into marketing communications and worked in the corporate space for many years. So I really developed my project management abilities and skills through that work. I've worked on all different types of projects, largely communications projects. And so I bring that skill set to anything I do, including my books. Like I mentioned, I've done these books from soup to nuts, 3 books, the full series. I've marketed them. I've just done the distribution. And that's been in a lot of the local mom and pop bookstores and through Barnes and Noble and Amazon. I've applied those learnings in those ways. And now I'm using my project management skills with my PhD program. So project management it's just the ability to understand pretty much, we call it the three points of the pyramid, right? Scope, time, cost, to get really technical. but understanding how to manage projects, understanding the stakeholders, and kind of all the facets of a program or a project. I feel like that comes through, and that's how I was able to get my certification, really calling on my years of experience in that regard. And I do apply those skills on really any project I do. And most recently, I think some work that we've been doing in the health literacy space, because, as a literacy scholar, I'm looking at literacy in many different ways, because, it's just a different content area, right? Literacy is the ability to understand, but the content can change. And so for me, I'm marrying my history and my experience in healthcare and medical communications and marketing to kind of bring that into the health literacy space, which is one that's really needed, particularly now in this era of COVID, right? And we've all seen the disparities that exist and the need for understanding and learning, and really just health literacy and what we all need to do to keep ourselves healthy and the best advocates for our own health.
So what's your, with all these projects and
right,
all these balls in the air, once you, when is your completion for the PhD?
Well, I'm hoping it'll be soon. I'm hoping by the end of the year I can get, most of my work done, but we'll see. It'll be this year or early next year. I'll be done. Mm-hmm.
And what will be beyond that for you? I mean, you have the next series of books.
Yeah.
And
yeah. So in terms of my books, I'll do that second edition, as I mentioned, that will really kind of highlight the culmination of my literacy work. I have 4 books, believe it or not, in my head right now that are waiting for me to finish this program so I can get back at it. Every day I'm looking at beautiful images and beautiful illustrations, and thinking, okay, what do I want the next volume to look like? So I'm moving in that direction. I'd mentioned that there's a publication, a quarterly publication. I'm working with some of my colleagues from Columbia Journalism to try and bring that idea to life. And then the health literacy space. I really want to kind of start changing the narrative in those spaces, and expanding the conversation, expanding the stories, expanding, again, our ability as a culture to represent ourselves and advocate for ourselves and our own health.
Okay. And going back to your bio, you studied abroad in Spain. How did that experience help shape some of what you're doing now?
Oh gosh, yeah. So when I was an undergrad, I actually went to La Universidad de Salamanca in Spain, in the city of Salamanca, Spain. And I did a semester abroad there. That definitely changed my outlook on the world. I was one of the crazy kids who just immersed herself in the culture. People in my program were like, wow, we never see you. And I'm like, yeah, I came to Spain to experience a different culture. And it was really eye-opening. I mean, there were good points, there were not so good points, but it all impacted me and have, helped shape me into the person that I am today. I ultimately ended up returning to Spain, and I worked for Deloitte & Touche as a translator for a bit. Met my then not my now ex-husband, but it definitely shaped my outlook. Developing a level of fluency as I did changed the way I thought about the world. I mean, it just really changed everything, because when you get to that level of fluency, you start to dream in a foreign language, and that's when you've kind of turned a corner, right? And it was really interesting because I've grown a lot since then. I've grown from where I started to where I was then and to where I am now. And I've seen in so many ways that people are very much the same. I've also seen that we're very different. And I've also learned that we need to appreciate those differences as much as we need to appreciate the similarities. And I think that's one of the things and one of the ways that my experience abroad has shaped me. I also, being the only Black person in the room, that's an understatement when you're the only Black person in the city or the town, and that's a bit of an exaggeration, but when they stare at you because you're the one lone Black person from the United States, and you become the spokesperson for the culture, that's an interesting space to be in, and you become really really aware of what you're saying, what you're doing, and you learn how the world sees you or doesn't see you, right? And again, that's that notion of access, equity, and inclusion that's become so important. You see that people abroad maybe only see the rap videos and think that you're this kind of way because they've only seen this. They don't know about the rich history of authors and writers and scientists and physicians and, the whole thing. And so, they see you as the person on the bus, but they don't know that your parents are both professionals who've got really rich histories of, historic spaces in the US, like New Orleans and Tulsa. They don't know any of what that means and how that informs or makes you the person that you are, right? And so living through those experiences and bringing those realities, I didn't even know how important some of this stuff was. It was stuff I had taken for this, this is just my family. That's all I know, and then you come to find out, what? Oh, okay. I get it now. Yeah. And I got to do something, and I got to do something different, So I think in those ways, that was my experience, and that's kind of my takeaway. And that's, like I said, part of what shaped me and got me to where I am now, where I'm writing books, where I feel I'm trying to reflect and refract the African American experience.
Valerie,
yeah,
this has been such a rich conversation, girl. You got so many things going on. I'm glad you're a friend.
I know. It's crazy. Yeah.
So just mention, and we put it. We're gonna put it on the Facebook page. But tell us your websites, and because you got Coco Kids, you got Valerie.
Yeah. So I've got my portfolio page is all my stuff. That's my PMP, my storytelling, my research. That's vwilliamsanchez.org. But my books are at cocokidscollectionbooks.com. And my research is readingbuildsempathy.info. So those are the three that anybody needs to know. And you can actually get to everything from vwilliamsanchez.org.
Okay. And your books are available on Amazon,
Barnes and Noble, and through the distributor, because I self-publish through, it's print on demand through Lulu Publishing. And if you do an author search or a title search, you can find them.
Okay. And we're gonna hook you up with our friends at People Get Ready Bookstore, Dolores and Lauren.
Yay.
So we can have some books up here in New Haven.
Awesome.
And I want to thank you. We really appreciate this conversation. I'll be like keeping up with you on LinkedIn and social media and stuff. Like up. She ain't in Columbia no more.
Yeah. No, don't even try it. You're keeping up with me. I'm trying to keep up with you. And I thank you for inviting me to talk and spend this time with you. I mean, it's tremendous. And I love all the work that you're doing in all the different spaces. You're really making a difference. And that's important.
I appreciate it. Charmaine and Emily. Emily is our other team member. Charmaine and Emily, I'm so blessed to have them. We are working to help to keep Elm City Lit Fest lit all year round.
I love it. Hey, anything I can do. I did share this with on my personal networks, and I'll post it again for those in my school, because the literacy department, I'm sure there are others who are interesting, and there's others who are interesting that I would love to kind of keep in the loop in the conversation, because it's a great cohort that's doing wonderful things. So yeah, for sure.
Oh, wonderful. We look forward to it, because it's all about our platform is to promote and celebrate the literary artists, literature, literacy, everything for the African diaspora.
Yeah.
We have to promote our own, for us and by us. So
Amen.
I want to thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Valerie, for coming through.
Oh, thank you. You and the questions you've asked are amazing. I mean, the great conversation, and I appreciate your really, insightful questions, your, deep interest in the topics, and your real commitment to, making a difference and improving literacy, literature for the culture. That's what we need. That's really what we need.
Yep.
All we have
out there. We gotta get some educators too.
Yeah.
To get on board with this.
Yeah, like I said, whatever I can do, I will. And I'm already thinking of a couple of people I'd love to make introductions to you, because I think it would be a really great thing to have that connection.
And what were you gonna say, Sha?
Oh, I was just saying, we are all we have. We are responsible for our culture, our people, what we're learning, what our kids are taking in. It's up to us at this point. It's always been up to us, but I think now folks are grasping and understanding that no one is going to feed us and nurture us in the way that we need to.
There, you just said it, in the way that we need to hear it and see it and be about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I want to thank everybody who is on Facebook Live and YouTube who has joined us. We have Valerie's information is on our page, and we thank you all for joining us tonight. It's another lit Elm City Lit Fest podcast. We will see you in 2 weeks. Blessings. Everybody stay safe and well.